You're doing the next one. Start.
Wonderful, merciful Savior, precious Redeemer and friend, who would have thought that a lamb could rescue the souls of men? Oh, you rescue the souls of men. You are the one that we praise. You are the one we adore. You give the healing and praise. Our hearts always hunger for. Oh, our hearts always hunger for. Counselor, Comforter, Keeper, Spirit we long to embrace. You offer hope when our hearts have hopelessly lost the way. Oh, we hopelessly lost the way. You are the one that we praise. You are the one we adore. You give the healing and grace. Our hearts always hunger for. Oh, our hearts always hunger for. The splendor of the King, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice. Trembles at his voice. How great is our God! Sing with me, how great is our God! And all will see how great is our God. Age to age He stands, and time is in His hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God! Sing with me, how great is our God! And all will see how great is our God! Name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing, how great In moments like these, I sing out a song. I sing out a love song to Jesus. In moments like these, I lift up my hands. I lift up my hands to the Lord, singing, I love you, Lord, singing, I love you, Lord, singing, I love you, Lord, I love you. In moments like these, I sing out a song. I sing out a love song to Jesus. In moments like these, I lift up my hands. I lift up my hands to the Lord, singing, I love you, Lord, singing, I love you, Lord, singing, I love you, Lord, I love you.
It is after lunch, so everyone would feel naturally sleepy. But keep yourself self awake. We have got a lot of exciting and wonderful sessions ahead of us, and may God be with us, and may the Holy Spirit speak to us in His own sweet way. So at this time, I would invite any of the group discussion leader to come and share their report, a 1 minute report, quick report on what they discussed and how it went.
This time, I thank God for giving us this wonderful retreat, taking a step back in the hustle and bustle of life to ponder about God, about His love, and all the good stuff we are hearing here. The questions which we were meditating or discussing outside were got us into a lot of directions. How can a loving God allow bad things to happen? We ended up with the point which we learned, because love comes with the free will. So that's where we ended it. But one example we talked about was when somebody is pointing at a gun and is about to kill, why God doesn't intervene and stop that and save a life there. But we went in the direction of God's free will. Because He loves us, He has also given love, free will. Without that, love doesn't mean anything. We also talked about the ethos, the fundamental thing about love, how as humans we related to in the relationship realm, but the fundamental things of which love has no dimension. It was even before creation of man, had no past, present, future, all those points we meditate upon. Can God still love us if we reject Him? How we handled that question was, even though we are sinners, He died for us, and that itself is an indication that He will love us. But one question came out of that was, once we have received a salvation and then we turn back, like the example Pastor gave us, Charles Templeton, will he have the salvation still with him or not? We were talking about that. That could be something you can help us with. And the last one was, when have we seen God's love when we did not deserve it? We just spent like 10 seconds in it because it was so obvious that all the things we have in this world, everything is out of God's love. We are unworthy people. Thank you.
Hey everyone. One of the things that we talked about was the first question of how can a loving God allow bad things to happen? When I first saw this question, I kind of rephrased it in my head. I said, and a lot of people have asked me this question too, of how can a loving God allow bad things to happen to good people? And a lot of people have this question in their minds of, you know, if we're good, right, how can bad things still happen to us? But that's the thing. None of us is good, right? So now you have to rephrase that, and you have to say, well, bad things happen to bad people, right? And so that kind of got us talking about, you know, the mercy and grace of God and, you know, how we don't deserve any of that. We don't deserve any of that. Instead, we all deserve condemnation for our sins. We all deserve death for our sins, right? And so just for, you know, being able to wake up every day, to open our eyes to see, to actually get out of bed, right? And to just see a new day. That itself is the grace of God. And we don't deserve to see that at all, right? We should have died yesterday, but here we are today, right? So that itself, life, it's not what we deserve at all. So that was what we talked about.
Thank you very much, Brother Ravi and our own Daniel Mohite. So I would invite Brother Krish to come and bless us with his word.
Familiar, I just left my mask there. So, trying to do something different. And Danny brought up a good question on bad things happening to good people. The definitive classic on this was written by a Jewish rabbi, when bad things happen to good people. It was written in 1981 by the name of Harold Kushner. And I think his son was diagnosed with progeria, which is that aging disease. So the child ages quite rapidly. And so, as a devout Jew, he wrote a book that has given comfort to many people. Because the issue of bad and good actually is anchored in the definition itself, it's not in the behavior. When you look at it through the biblical theological context that all are sinners and have fallen short of glory of God, so there is not one good person on earth, so that question falls and fails on its own logic. That's Apologetics 101. But, as John Lennox says, the good news is only good news if people think their lives are bad. A majority of the people in this world who haven't heard the good news are wondering why you call him a God of love and still I see so much evil. So that was how Anthony Flew and all said when they see Time magazine with the starving children in Africa, they begin to wonder, can a loving God be indeed in charge of creation? Well, the logical train of thought for that actually is a little more complex. It's based on the definition and not the behavior. If you think there is something good, then you have a standard by which you're calling it good, and you're having a standard by which you're calling something bad. So good and evil have a standard based on your definition of what is good and evil. If there is something good and you have a standard for it, that standard came from somewhere. It's called morals. If you have morals that give you a standard to define a behavior, that standard has to come from a standard giver or a moral giver. Which means a moral law now posits a moral lawgiver. So actually what you do is if you go down the definition track, you end up proving God instead of disproving him. Because a moral law can only give a moral law can only come from a moral lawgiver. A moral law can only define what is good and bad, and you can then define how you're going to behave based on the definition. So it's not wordplay. It's literally tied into the etymology and the root derivatives of how we get these concepts. Now, I want to fast track to where we are today, because now we're going to go into the concept of understanding. If we're going to talk about plugging into power, prayer is something that we all do. We have just rectified and said, hey, we intercede or we petition. We said, let's define love. We explored love more as as an ethos rather than an action or an emotion. And we talked about the 4 great loves. Which brings us to understanding, how does the same world have worship leaders today walking away from God because they want to love everybody, and Mother Teresa, loving everybody, never left God? Can you get some water maybe? So, yeah, just a bottle of water if possible. Sorry about that. But it's a problem when you have Indian food for lunch. You don't know which burp is going to trigger, but some spice will come up in it. That's gross, but it does happen. That's why you shouldn't do it. The concept of Mother Teresa is very different. Mother Teresa was asked the question about love. First, she was asked the question, did she ever doubt God? Here was a woman who sacrificed her entire life to loving other people. What was her understanding about this love of God that allowed her to plug into Him? Thank you. Allowed her to plug into Him every single day of her life and insist that the sisters who came to work for her understood that they had to take abject vows of poverty so that they could understand those they were serving. So for this, the book I would recommend is a book called Something Beautiful for God. In Audible, it's a very short, it takes about 2.5 hours to get through it if you listen to it. Something Beautiful for God by Malcolm Muggeridge. This actually was a derivative of a BBC television program he had done in India when he got her permission. So there's actually a chapter in the book which is her conversation with Muggeridge as to why did you go down this path? What made you understand the plight of the poor to the degree that you sacrificed everything? And her answers are very telling, because her answers are very rooted in the identity she had as a believer. So if you look at the part of the scripture we are tracking with, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. So by Him, in Romans it says, by Him, through Him, for Him, with Him. This goes back to the original things we talked about of grace alone, and by that grace, that definitive saving power. I want you to look at this because this counters the modern cultural ethos that is taking place within evangelicalism, and that is the self-image movement. If we make them feel good about themselves, they'll enjoy worship. If we make them more comfortable in their surroundings, they'll come more often. If we create more programs that are applicable to them, it's all self. Every single one of those are conditioned on what self does so that God can better be understood. And the opposite is actually true if you listen to Mother Teresa's words. It is when she stands in Yemen and the leprosy afflicted people are in front of her and they heard of her work with leprosy patients, a Muslim country, the hotbed of terrorism, invites Mother Teresa, their Nobel laureate, and she stands on the edge where the people are thrown outside the city. And they said, can you do some for these people? I heard you do that for these people in other parts of the world. Which means these are the dregs of our society where the stigma of their disease throughout human history has cast such a spurious glance on them that even looking at them makes us feel that we will have bad luck. I grew up in India. We had a leprosy home next to a reading room. My mother would say, don't even walk on that side of the road. It'll curse you for generations. Mother Teresa, on the other hand, is standing here dressed in her little blue and white sari with the blue border and the plastic footwear, and she is looking down, and the first words out of her mouth, Jesus, how could we have left you like this? What you have done to the least of these. Lord, when did we ever see you naked? that we clothed you? When were you hungry that we fed you? What you have done to the least of these, you have done to me also. Understanding. I remember when I met Mother Teresa in 1994 and I wrote her a letter from Dallas thanking her for the opportunity and all that, she sent me a small note that changed my understanding. Dear Krish Dunham, say yes to the least of humanity. By picking those up most deserving in the eyes of a loving God, you will have participated in the greatest good of all. I mean, that's fascinating. Now she is not treating understanding in living, understanding in missions, understanding in application, understanding in generosity, understanding in charity as a behavior. It is a foundational definition. How could we have left you like this? Because everything we do by us, through us, from us is because of you. Now, if you want the biblical corollary to this, read Daniel chapter 3, where Nebuchadnezzar was caught up in the self. And he says, what does he say? And maybe we'll just, I can read that component for you. Bear with me. So Romans 11:36 for him, we just completed that. So in Daniel 4:30, Nebuchadnezzar says, is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? How selfish, here's a king, he's building these grand edifices, and this is the foundational mistake some of us make. I'm doing this because I get to do it. I'm doing this because I was called to do it. And I've been in many seminaries, and in fact, I donated some money to a seminary in India, and they named an apartment after my mother-in-law. So when we walk by there, what do I have? I have a halo adjustment. I did that. You go to Ranchi, and then you drive from there to Dumka, where I was not allowed to go for 8 years because it's called the graveyard of missionaries. I finally went to a church that was built by our ministry, and I proudly stood next to the stone saying, donated for Friends of North Texas. I did that. But she's standing in front of people cast away in a predominantly hostile nation saying, Jesus, how could we have left you like that? And the Yemeni government said, can you send some sisters here? She said, sure. You must give me a place where they can have some quiet time and meditation. And the Yemeni government built actually a church for Mother Teresa in Yemen. What can God do? Well, Nebuchadnezzar says, look what I did, and literally went mad. If you follow the story, he went out to live with animals. Now fast forward to 434 and see what he says there. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified Him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation, just like it was prayed at the beginning. From generation to generation, from eternity to eternity. That was our opening prayer. So here we stand in the gap asking ourselves, now don't hear what I'm not saying. Sometimes we get so caught up in the complex theology of an eternity we can't prove that we miss the hell on earth. And there's hell all around. And we are literally called to wear the armor of God and understand, how could we have left you like this? Because He died for everybody. In fact, one of the statements from the cross was, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Then He said, it is finished, and for 2,000 years we've been starting new stuff, not knowing what to do. Everybody has a new idea of how evangelism is now going to change the world. Well, I'm going to use technology. Pulpit preachers have said this from the beginning of time. We have now cornered, we've figured out how to save the world. And Mother Teresa was asked the question, do you convert them? She says, no, Christ does. I have a hall of dying. What does the hall of dying do? Gives them dignity. Read her book, No Greater Love. She says, I went on the evening rounds with my sisters and I found a man whose body had been gross, his body had been eaten up by maggots, some of them were still alive, as it lay stuck to the hot asphalt of that Calcutta sun. As we grabbed him up, we left parts of his body still glued to the road. He didn't have much time to live. We clothed him, we gave him dignity, we held him, and he said this, "I have lived the life of a dog stuck to the side of a road. I am going to die looking into the eyes of an angel." In that moment, his life transformed. In that moment, Jesus appeared. I had a very similar experience, nothing as profound as hers, but I remember one time. Understanding is a very interesting thing because if you think it's about you, you will start justifying. If you think it's about him, it will start revealing. Where you're used as a vessel, and your emptiness will make more noise than any of your vocabulary can. Some of you in the Karnataka area, you probably recognize the name of the city, Hosur, and the Christian Academy there, Acts Academy there. I had the chance to preach in it. So they said, "Hey, you're in Bangalore anyway, why don't you come and spend a morning chapel service with us?" Well, Hosur is on the southern side of the city, and to get back from there to the Bangalore airport would have taken 4.5 hours, so I opted to drive a car between Bangalore and Chennai, something I hadn't done in ages. It's a beautiful road for most of the time. You can do the first 200 kilometers in 30 minutes, and then the last 30 kilometers takes you a week as you get to Chennai. But I insisted on two things. I said I want an English-speaking driver or a Telugu-speaking driver because I don't understand Kannada. And preferably get someone who is conversational, because I sit in the front seat with him, I don't sit at the back. It's an opportunity. Well, as soon as I sat in the car and I gave him the directions, the first question out of his mouth, he says, "Are you a Christian?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Yeah, you people come here and corrupt everything." I said, "Well, that's a good place to start. Now that we have 4.5 hours and a big tip depends on your justification, you're going to have to explain your point of view." Well, as he drove into this campus, he saw these beautiful buildings, all Western money. So he was right. He says, "Yeah, you guys go to America, send all the money here and try to corrupt us." I said, "You know who are the richest people in America?" He said, "Who?" I said, "The Hindus. You need to tell me, I'll tell them to send you some money too." And he kind of chuckled. But he was not buying it. Because at that point, I was justifying. I was not revealing. I was justifying my existence. I was trying to explain to a humble cab driver why I get to have a car that picks me up from a 5-star hotel, takes me to flap my gums in a chapel, and then drives me to the Taj in Chennai. Everything about my day reeked of luxury and opportunism. And my guilt was not having any of it, so I'm justifying. And as I finished preaching, they handed me an envelope. In fact, when they did that, I suddenly thought to myself, I said, "Jesus, please reveal yourself. Please make this about your grace and not my eloquence. Please make this about your presence and not my justification." And the only answer that came to me was, "Let him hold the envelope while you're greeting other people." So he was there with my bag. I asked him to come with me inside. He did. He was holding my bag because I was going to change into traveling clothes from my suit. And as they gave me the envelope, I was still shaking hands. I just gave him the envelope. I said, "Hold on to this. I'll go change and I'll come back and we'll talk about it." I just said, "Hold on to this." So he's now holding on to that which he accused me of. I want you to picture this in your mind. This is where understanding begins this is when revelation takes place. He is now getting a glimpse of that which is alluded to. Whatever he's blaming you for, he is now a co-conspirator. Here's the principle. Never stand across from someone trying to make them understand. Stand side by side and look in the same direction, and you'll both see the same thing. It'll work in marriages, it'll work in relationships, it'll work in any environment. Well, as we got off, and I got back in the car, I asked him a question. Let me get back to my clock So I asked him a question. I said, "What do you think is in that envelope?" He said, what else, money? I said, do you want to count it or you want me to count it? He said, why would I count it? I said, because half is yours. And he paused. He said, why would half be yours? I said, the Bible tells us to go in twos. And for lack of better experience today, you were my two. Whatever I get, I have to share with you. It's what I'm commanded to do. And the tears began to flow. He had never expected to have a windfall. His understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ was a blasphemous one. It was based on limited conjecture. It was based on experience that was clouded and probably bad. I wrote a book with so many people, but one of the people I wrote a book with, he left the church because the church had disappointed him. And I remember sitting with him. I said, Billy Sunday used this illustration. One day he went by a guy's house and he says, why don't you come to the revival meeting? Because this guy was the biggest drunk in the place. But he was also the union leader at the local mill, and someone said, if old John comes to your meeting and gives his life to Christ, all 110 people in the mill will follow him because he's a leader. And that evening when Billy Sunday, the great evangelist, went to that guy's house and said, why do you hate the church? He says, you guys are all about yourselves. Don't care about anybody else. And Billy Sunday asked him a question. He said, John, on my way to your house, I saw a dog that was tied up outside the house that was barking ferociously at me, and if released, it would bite me. Do you know about that dog? He says, yeah, that's my dog. He says, why is he so ferocious? He said, well, he's guarding my property. Okay. He says, now, if I was angry at your dog and I slapped your wife, would you be mad? And John said, of course. He said, don't slap Christ because you're mad at the church. And that evening, John came and gave his life to Christ, and everybody else followed in that town. When we got to the Taj Coromandel or whichever hotel I was in Chennai at that time, this guy's driver's name was Vijay Kumar. He said in Telugu, and he said, sir, he said, one more hour with you, sir, I'd become a Christian. I said, let's go for another round. He says, no, sir, I'm on shift. But at least I brought him from the point of contempt to the point of conversation. That's understanding. Understanding is not the theological ramifications that make you allow yourself to split doctrine. I've shared this illustration with you before. I was in some city and one well-meaning guy came up to me. He said, sir, you make people laugh, but I saw where it said Jesus cried. I never saw anywhere where it says Jesus laughed. I mean, this is the complex theology in our pews. I looked at him and I said, of all the problems on planet Earth, you're worried that I make people laugh. He said, I didn't look at it that way. And then it dawned on him. See, just because you hold your breath, the universe doesn't suffocate. We are part of a finished work. He said it is finished, and He will do it without us. And that's very important in the understanding stage, because the comfort we give others first came to us, comes to us, from Him, to us, through us, because of Him, and for Him. So when you look at the Great Commission, or you look at the parable of the vineyard, and it says that the harvest is plenty, but the laborers are few, we can only operate in the harvest if we go into the harvest with the belief the harvest is His, the labor is His, the laborers are His, the reward is His, the gain is His. By interjecting yourself into the process and making yourself bigger than it is, you dilute your own ability and you dilute His capability through you. So being a willing vessel takes two things. First, it takes discipline. And one of the stories I want to give you is the story of that great evangelist who Time magazine described as the greatest evangelist of the 20th century, Eli Stanley Jones, who labored in India for 50 years. He's the founder of the ashram movement. In fact, he took a lot of flack from the Methodist Church in the U.S. when he says, I sit on the floor of the Indian ashrams cross-legged, wearing a kurta pajama, and invite some of the elites so we can understand. And their idea of evangelism was go build a school, go build a hospital, do whatever it is, but you're diluting the gospel. And Stanley Jones, who befriended Mahatma Gandhi and wrote a book in 1925 called Christ of the Indian Road, asked Mahatma Gandhi that question: what does Christianity have to do to be a mainline thing and not a white man's import? And Gandhi gave him 4 principles, 2 of which we've covered. He says, live like him, love like him, understand other worldviews, and don't water down your own. Even Gandhi said, understand. Now, Stanley Jones is a very interesting illustration because on one of his furloughs, he came back to the U.S. And I think it was in Louisiana somewhere where he was supposed to raise some money. And the people who were waiting for him at the gathering sent a young man to pick him up. The young man had heard of the great evangelist and thought to himself, if I just tell this guy that there's traffic and take him on a wronger way, I'll have more time with the genius, the wisdom. So what did the young man want? He wanted the influence of the old man, but he didn't understand. He didn't understand that there is no shortcut to wisdom. Knowledge is learned, wisdom is lived. We got more knowledge now than at any other time in human history. Largest percentage of educated people messing up the planet right now. So this little guy decides that he's going to go to the hotel at 7 in the morning when Stanley Jones was supposed to be picked up at 8. And Stanley Jones writes the story in his autobiography, Song of Ascents. And so he goes and knocks on the door at 7, there's no answer. He goes and knocks on the door at 7:15, no answer. Now all the while he's thinking, if I can get this man 30 minutes ahead of schedule, I can take him around, tell him the freeway shut down, and I'll have more time with him. When he had knocked 3 different times and the door didn't answer, but when he went at his appointed time at 5 till 8 for an 8 o'clock pickup and knocked on the door, Stanley Jones opened the door. And the young kid was perplexed. He said, sir, I've knocked so many times, but you didn't open. But you were in your room all the time. He said, yes, son, you need to understand something. I was in prayer from 7 o'clock for today. And when I'm in prayer, I can't hear anything else. Let those words go through the eye gate, settle on the conscience. More powerful words I've never read. When I'm in prayer, I can't hear anything else. And I'll stand in front of you, like Paul said, I am the chief among sinners. If that is the standard of understanding God, I've not understood one iota of God. I can hear everything when someone's praying. In fact, most of us are waiting to hear what? In the name of, because we know, it's getting ready to be done. Anytime, no matter how long they pray, as soon as you get to that point, we ask all of these things in the name of the, oh my God, oh yeah. You know? We hear. What Mother Teresa said, what Stanley Jones said is understanding God doesn't take hearing His word, it takes listening to His word. Hearing is involuntary, it's sound vibrating on the eardrum. Listening is voluntary, it forces a reaction from within. All right, I just want to make sure I covered all my notes here. All right, so to us, with us, for us, by us, and through us. Now, as you go into the next set of discussion, I want you to now start calibrating, putting it all together in some way. While I want you to talk about understanding and explore those questions, I want you to bring into the concept, how does understanding prayer allow us to plug in better? How does understanding love make it better? And then when we get to grace, which covers it all, we'll begin to understand how important prayer, love, and understanding are to the element of grace. And that's when, it will start putting that little frame around it. Now, I know it's late in the afternoon, but this is something you have to understand about the concept of God. Unless you respond to the character of God, not through the generational time and the linear time that we follow. Like I said, it takes discipline. Last night I went to bed at 11:30, but I woke up at 4:30 this morning and wrote my notes. I have woken up at between 4 and 4:30 every day for the last 27 years. I always read for 30 minutes in the morning and I write for 30 minutes in the morning, and after that I may go back to bed for an hour and wake up at 7 and go to the gym or whatever. But hear me carefully, I'm not motivated to do that. It's now become a habit. And I want you to watch this carefully. Every thought you have about what is right or wrong influences the way you think. Every thought you have about what is right or wrong shapes the ideas that govern you. The ideas in some way spill over into the habits you develop. The habits then manifest into behaviors. The behavior reveals your character. Your character changes the destiny. The very way you think alters the outcome. I don't wake up in the morning at 4:30 because I'm a disciplinarian. I wake up in the morning at 4:30 because I made that decision the previous night at 9 o'clock when I left the party, or the previous night when I said. And this is Pastor Sam Kamalesan's greatest teaching that he ever taught me when I sat with him in a living room in California. At 9 o'clock, they said, he just stands up. He says, I have to go to bed, so I'm well rested to come serve my Lord tomorrow. The door locks both ways. Finish your time, close the door on your way out. And he would leave the party he was hosting. That takes character. Character is the ability to have pride in the mundane. So, true to my word, they gave me 30 minutes. I'm at 29. I'll hush and I'll turn it over. There you go. How about that for time?
So a quick announcement. The discussion points will be shown on the screen. For those who are live, you can look at the discussion point and have a short discussion at your home or wherever you are watching it with your friends and with the people around you. For the purposes of time, I would suggest that we can have a 20-minute discussion for this one, and we'll come back after 20 minutes and then we'll continue with the next section. So please go and have a discussion for 20 minutes and then we can come back.